Hi guys, Mr. McNichol here again. Okay, well, English 2 on level. Got a few things for you folks to do, okay? Or a few things for you folks to learn. I'll jump right into it. This is the review for your final exam for next week. I'm still waiting to find out when that's going to be due by. Tentatively, I want to make it due by Wednesday. Okay? This first lecture is just going to cover the characters from the review sheet that I posted for you a couple days ago. Okay? So in Gatsby, for example, well, the character of Nick. Nick is the... You guys want to hit the pause button if you need to, by the way, and write stuff out. And again, I don't mind if you share this, okay? I don't. This is a review, okay? All right, number one. Nick he's the narrator of the story. He's from the Midwest. He's been born into money. He tries to make his own way in the bond business. He's Daisy's cousin. At the end, he's pretty much Gatsby's only real friend. He makes Gatsby's funeral happen, and he goes back to the Midwest when he's fed up with the rich, shallow people in New York. Daisy, the next character. Daisy is Nick's cousin, as I mentioned. She is the wife of Tom Buchanan. Daisy is a smart lady, but she manages to project an image of being a bubble-headed, shallow, wealthy person. Daisy is willing to give up the man she loves, which apparently at one point was Gatsby, for the security of a man from her own social class. That's Tom. So whereas many women, if they found out that their husbands cheated on them, they'd say, that's it, we're done. Well, she sticks with Tom again and again and again as he cheats on her and runs off with all of these floozies, women of lower class than himself. Wow, let's see. Okay. Hey, President Trump wants me to help him get reelected again. I just have to send $5. Okay, maybe later. Okay, maybe later, President Trump. Anyways, Tom is Daisy's husband. Tom is born into money. He is also Nick's classmate from Yale University. He is part of the privileged class. Okay. Tom is a brutal man. He sees his wife. He may say he loves his wife, but just as Daisy doesn't necessarily love Tom, but she puts up with him because he can give her what she wants in terms of material comforts, Tom sees Daisy more as a possession. Remember, some of you noted that that's how Daisy looks at her child, Pammy. She's not the way most moms would see a child. It's the way most girls might look at a doll or something to be shown off. Tom sees Daisy much in the same way. He will cheat on her. He gets upset when he finds out she's cheating on him, and he gets even more upset when she is cheating on him with somebody he calls Mr. Nobody from nowhere. Okay? So he sees Daisy as a possession, and he wants to show everybody that he's in charge of her. That's why he lets Daisy drive back with Gatsby later on, after that big, huge blow-up at the Palace Hotel penthouse room. Okay. Going down the list, Jordan. Jordan is a golf pro. She cheats at golf. Okay, she's a terrible driver, and she's a careless person, and she kind of shows insight into what the idle rich are like, at least the author Fitzgerald's idea of what the idle rich are like. When she dates Nick, she's Nick's girlfriend for a while, but she tells Nick, I don't have to be careful. Everyone else around me is careful. So she's a careless person. She's a shallow person as well. Gatsby, next on the list. Gatsby is, as we know, he started out poor. He ended up meeting Daisy. He wants to be rich. He always wanted to improve himself. Okay? He went to war, unlike, say, Tom. And Nick went to war as well. This forms a bond between the pair of them. Now, he invents a new past, okay? When he is a young man, he meets a wealthy fellow named Dan Cody. We're going to be talking about him in a second. But Gatsby basically reinvents himself. He wants to better himself, but the way he chooses to better himself is to try and pretend his past never happened at all, and he keeps on reinventing anew, from James Gatz to Jay Gatsby, and so forth. Okay? Meyer Wolfsheim. Okay, he's another major character we meet. He's only in there for a couple of scenes. Meyer Wolfsheim is a kind of a father figure to Gatsby. When Gatsby gets cut out of his inheritance from millionaire Dan Cody, he decides to try and become wealthy the way some folks were becoming wealthy back then, by selling bootleg or illegal alcohol. Okay, Meyer Wolfsheim is a gangster. He fixed the 1919 World Series. He is a brutal man. He has cufflinks made of human molars, don't forget. And moreover, he basically sees the little Gatsby as my boy, calls him my boy again and again. Okay? Unfortunately, Meyer Wolfsheim is a lousy father figure. When Gatsby is actually dead, Meyer Wolfsheim will not be seen at Gatsby's funeral. He doesn't want to be tainted by all the bad rumors about Gatsby being a gangster. Bull! Dan Cody, last thing, he was kind of Gatsby's second father figure after his blood father figure. Dan Cody, basically, Gatsby saved him when he was drunk and he was about to crash his boat. Gatsby gets on the boat, saves him, and when Dan asks him, "What's your name, son?" he says, instead of saying James Gatz, I'm Jay Gatsby. So Gatsby, in a sense, has managed to have a total of three father figures in his life. His own dad, who shows up at his funeral, okay, one of the three people who shows up at his funeral. Dan Cody, okay, who is the millionaire who Gatsby sails around the world with 3 times, and he learns what it means to be rich, how do rich people act, how do rich people talk, and things like that. And then last, Meyer Wolfsheim. And Meyer Wolfsheim gives him all the ins and outs of how to be a gangster, how to get rich being a gangster, and how to deal with gangsters. Okay? Jumping down to the next group of characters, My Antonia. Well, the main character is Antonia Shimerda. Okay? Antonia Shimerda, she is the oldest daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Shimerda. Jimmy has a crush on her almost from the get-go. Okay? And later on, Antonia ends up having to become the mother figure for all of her siblings when her dad takes his own life. Later on, you could argue, when Antonia is looking, she kind of spends the rest of her life looking for a father figure, which is one of the reasons why she ends up getting together with Larry Donovan. I'm going to talk about him later on. But later in life, she's happy. She marries Cusack. They have a bunch of kids. Even though her looks fade, Jimmy still sees her as beautiful. Now, Jimmy, or James Burden, he's the main character of the story, and he is the narrator. And it's telling, because other people may have a different idea of who Antonia is or what she was like. But remember, this story is my Antonia. Okay? So Jimmy, basically, he's an orphan. He ends up being raised by his grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Josiah and Emmeline Burden. Okay? He is raised to be a farmer. Josiah Burden figures out Jimmy's not a farmer type, though, really. Okay? Jimmy can do it. It's not really who he is. He goes off and becomes a lawyer instead. And sadly, we find out early on in the story, he marries a woman who's not very nice. Okay? Not a very enjoyable person. Okay? Jimmy ends up marrying somebody, in fact, who marries him, it's implied, just to kind of defy her parents. Oops. Well, it's kind of sad. Lena Lingard. Okay? Lena Lingard is a woman who basically becomes her own woman. She becomes an independent dressmaker and businesswoman. She dates Jimmy for a while, especially when he's in college in the town she's in, but not a whole lot goes on beyond that. Okay, but Lena basically is depicted as one of these women who is very independent-minded, okay, and can be independent. Josiah Burden basically is Jimmy's grandfather, and his grandmother is Emmeline Burden. So Josiah and Emmeline Burden are the grandparents of Jimmy Burden. They are lifelong farmers. They have 2 hired hands, and they become kind of the mother and father figures to Jimmy. Okay, so those are the kinds of people Jimmy has as his parent figures growing up. Mr. Shimerda, complicated fellow. Okay, we learned that he was a musician and very happy back in their home country in Eastern Europe, but Mrs. Shimerda. I think it's interesting. We never really know their first names. They're just Mr. and Mrs. Shimerda. But Mrs. Shimerda basically bullied him into relocating with their whole family to America because she felt their sons would have a better life in America. Well, Mr. Shimerda is a musician. He is not a farmer. He doesn't like it there. He becomes more and more depressed, and in the end, he takes his own life. He ends up being buried in unconsecrated ground. Okay, it's kind of sad when this happens. Mrs. Shimerda complains a lot. She's very suspicious of people. Eventually, she softens up. Okay, but remember, she complains. One of the first things she says: "Land no good. Land no good." Sorry, lady. Maybe you shouldn't have come here then. But as it is, her family ends up making their name out in America. Okay, Yulka Shimerda. Okay, well, Yulka Shimerda is the younger sister of Antonia. Okay, she ends up staying a little girl in many ways, and she has you could argue she has a much easier life than Antonia does as well. Ambrosch Shimerda is the oldest brother of Antonia. He's a very abrupt person. Okay, he doesn't like to small talk, and he doesn't like to make friends. Okay, you could argue too, he's very protective of Antonia and the other kids as well. Doesn't like to let anyone else mess with them. Okay, way it goes. But he takes over kind of as the father figure on the farm. Okay, and he's a tough guy to deal with. He ends up getting into a fight with some of the farm hands, kicks him in the chest and so forth. Okay, really causes a rift between Jimmy's family and Antonia's family. Larry Donovan. Okay, Larry Donovan. We never actually meet Larry Donovan. What we learn is he was Antonia's boyfriend, and unfortunately, okay, Larry and Antonia ended up. Antonia got pregnant by him. Okay, and right before their wedding, he jumps on a train and he disappears. Okay, so we talked in class what that could mean. Well, sometimes people who lose a parent tragically, they try and replace that with someone who is the kind of person who will leave too. They want to fix what went wrong, whatever it was that went wrong. So Antonia was going to marry Larry. She was carrying his child, and he left. Okay. Now the good news for Antonia was she found Cusack. Cusack is a fellow who's university level educated in intelligence. He's got a bit of a deformity. He's got a bit of a hump on his back. But he seems to be a really nice guy. And he and Antonia have, I think, about 10 children together by the time Jimmy comes back for his first visit about 20 years later. Okay? And he and Jimmy bond. It's a really interesting thing to see. Because we can all see Jimmy still has a thing for Antonia. But he bonds with Cusack. And we talked about that in class. Why would he do that? Well, maybe it's a way to stay close to Antonia. Maybe he's happy that this man Cusack is making Antonia happy. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it. Okay? So that's the first lecture. Okay? And that's the characters. So just do what you can with that, and we'll go from there. All right, guys. Good luck on the exams.